Hello, Emilio. Good afternoon.
Hello, how are you, Kiko? Very good afternoon. A hug.
Another hug for you. In the middle of Holy Week.
In the middle of Holy Week. Yes, sir. Here we are with trying to answer the questions from our monthly April meeting, which have been constant and also very, very interesting, each and every one of them.
I remember the title, which is A Knowledge That Will Transform Your Life. The deep understanding of what time is and its manifestations in material, vital, and spiritual time. This is the second part, answering the questions. See you later.
Very well, Kiko. Well, let's start. A very good day to all friends at this session. As we record the session, responding to your questions, to your observation in this monthly meeting of April 2025 with the study of time as the backdrop. As I shared with Kiko, there have been quite a few questions, specifically 43, the contributions you have made. And the truth is that on my part, I really appreciate that participation because being a topic so seemingly complicated, right? And maybe so uncommon when it comes to reasoning and reflecting on it in our lives. The truth is that your contributions have not only been numerous, of course, but most importantly, they have been powerful and very interesting. So we are going to share a magnificent session in line with them. The 43 questions you have submitted, I have distributed into a total of six sections. Although there is one of them, the one about Chronos and Kairos, material time and spiritual time, which undoubtedly absorbs the largest percentage of these questions. In any case, I will outline the scheme we are going to follow and we will start. We will begin with 5 issues you have raised regarding the birth of time and its presence in other realities. We will then move on to time as a vertical straight line, instantaneity, and as a circle or spiral. You have raised 4 issues related to this topic. Thirdly, we will address, as I just mentioned, Chronos and Kairos. There are 17 questions you have submitted related to this topic. Fourthly, we will analyze spiritual time and the parousia. You have raised 8 issues, and we will close with the section of other questions where there are also 8 experiences and shares that you put at our disposal. There is one in particular. So from there, friends, we start with the first block I just presented about the birth of time and its presence in other realities. A friend tells us, could you expand on how it is known that time did not exist before the Big Bang? From the point of view of spiritual traditions, this is taken for granted in itself. It is understood that what we know as time arises from the so-called second emanation and therefore did not exist in the first emanation, the primordial or primeval universe. And from the point of view of astrophysics, the studies that delve deeper into this relate the non-existence in that initial universe, in that primordial universe, of time due to the so-called entropy. Astrophysics studies tell us that at the start of the universe, there was a minimum state of entropy, and this implies that time, as we know it, does not exist. Time, therefore, in this sense, would be linked to the increase in entropy. If you go to the dictionary, you will see that, first of all, it tells us that entropy is the thermodynamic magnitude that measures the part of energy not usable to perform work and is expressed as the quotient between the heat given off by a body and its absolute temperature. However, regarding the emergence of time, we are more interested in the second appellation, the second interpretation that the dictionary gives us about entropy, which is the measure of disorder in a system. This is what astrophysics is based on a minimum state of entropy. Therefore, we could say a state of things that is enormously ordered, enormously symmetrical, where time as such does not function, where time as such does not operate. So it is the link to entropy, the understanding of entropy, that science fundamentally uses when proposing that time did not exist at that moment of the primordial universe or the primeval universe. A second question that arises here is, in a possible parallel universes, will space and time be shared in the same way? Would it be the same? Well, when we mention parallel universes, it is an expression we must be careful with to avoid falling into nothing more or less than science fiction, so to speak. Both spirituality and astrophysics indicate to us that there is a kind of primordial void, what spirituality calls the plenum, void, which being nothing, is nevertheless everything. Well, that primordial void, that plenum void, its state, its natural state, is vibratory. It vibrates, and it is the vibration of that void, of that initial state, of that which has no origin, nor is the origin of everything originated through its own vibration. It is Christ or the Word. In the Christian tradition, the emanation of the Eastern traditions, the AUM that those Eastern traditions speak of, and in the context of astrophysics, it is the fluctuation of the void. Well then, it must be assumed that the vibration that gives rise to this universe, being the vibratory state, the natural state of that primordial void, of that plenum void, must be assumed to have the possibility that this vibration has given rise to another universe. That is to say, the hypothesis must be considered, both from the point of view of astrophysics and from the point of view of spirituality. Indeed, the hypothesis that this universe is not the only one must be considered. From the point of view of astrophysics, this is something that is assumed. For example, in the posthumous article by Stephen Hawking, the great scientist, he speaks precisely about the certainty regarding that. In that posthumous article, which was published shortly after his death, with a collaborator, he states that one cannot say there are infinite universes, but rather that there is a finite number of other universes. From there, when we put this hypothesis of the existence of other universes on the table, it must be taken into account that they all arise from the same thing. So to speak, they do not arise from something different. We are always talking about something, that which has no origin and its vibrational state. From there, it must be assumed that those universes that arise, those other possible universes, should have a behavior similar to this one, and therefore, in principle, to the question of whether space and time in those other universes would behave the same as in this one. In principle, although it is evident that it is something that neither from the spiritual perspective nor from the scientific perspective can be affirmed 100%, it must be assumed that yes, they should be similar because they have the same origin and the same starting factor, which is the vibration of that which is going to happen to us. Third question you raise, can you explain what is really meant by changing the timeline and the parallel universes that can be created with our decisions? Well, a moment ago, friends, I pointed out the need to be careful when using the expression parallel universes. It is more correct from the perspective of spirituality and astrophysics to talk about several different multiple universes. The term parallel, from the point of view of what we have explained so far, is not very appropriate and leads to many assumptions that can lead us to erroneous mental deductions. However, when we talk about the universe, which can be created with our decisions, we are obviously talking about something completely different, Stephen Hawking's article does not refer to universes that we can create with our decisions. The spiritualist speaks to us about the possibility of other universes that we can create with our decisions. These universes, in quotes, hence I repeat, that we must be attentive and careful when using these expressions. The universes we can create with our decisions are not really other universes, but rather they are like timelines, just as this friend or acquaintance tells us in the question they pose. They are like timelines that open at a certain moment and have the characteristic of advancing in parallel, although they tend to converge in the medium or long term. This Petaum is also related to the theory of which most of you have surely heard about, the splitting of time, because at specific moments in our life, in our reality, not another universe, but in our reality, another timeline can open as a consequence of dilemmas that appear in our life. Albert Einstein said, and he explains this in a very graphic, though very surprising way. Albert Einstein said, I have a die in my hand, a die with 6 faces, each number, therefore, from 1 to 6. I roll the die. When I roll the die, which face comes up? I roll the die onto the table, which face, which number will come up. Let's suppose we roll the die. The die rolls across the table, it finally stops, and we see that the number 4 has come up. Well, we would give Einstein this answer. We rolled the die, and the number 4 came up. Einstein, however, said that from the perspective of physics, the theory of relativity, and also his early notes on quantum physics, all 6 numbers would have actually come up. That is to say, when rolling the die, before it lands on the number 4, we have opened different time vectors, we have opened different timelines that make it so that with 6 possibilities, 6 timelines have actually been opened. So we could say that 6 different situations are being experienced, even though we consciously are living the one related to the number 4, because that is the one we have seen. The die land on. The die on the table shows the number 4, and we say that it landed on 4. However, the other 5 options are unfolding in parallel realities that indeed tend to converge. This is a very deep topic and enormously interesting subject. And as we have often done in these monthly meetings, in this very talking about time session, I like to recommend movies because in a graphic and entertaining way, they highlight these kinds of profound matters. And regarding these parallel timelines, I repeat, they are not so much parallel universes, but parallel timelines that are unfolding, although we are only aware of one of them. I like to recommend 2 movies. In the text you will receive when Kiko sends you the video of this session, as you already know, you will also receive the text with the questions and issues you have raised. Well, in number 3, in the answer to question number 3, which is where we are, you will find the references, even with the ban. Links to the information sheet of these movies, the references, 2 movies. On one hand, the one translated into Spanish, which has been translated into Spanish with the title Two Lives in an Instant, which is from 1998, and the other movie, The Possible Lives of Mr. Novot, from the year 2009. The first one is simple, in quotes. I recommend starting with it because in the protagonist's life, 2 timelines open up. She is aware, so to speak, of one, where 2 lines have opened up due to a situation I won't reveal to you. And from there, the movie explores how those 2 timelines develop, and over the years, they tend to converge, tending to meet in the same scenario. As for The Possible Lives of Mr. Nobody, it is more complex because it's no longer just 2 timelines. Many more timelines open up, I recommend both to understand what parallel timelines are and not to confuse them with universes that may exist in a multiverse reality. Multiverses originate from that which has no origin, and these parallel timelines are related to the very dynamics of our lives. Therefore, they are completely different issues that, however, are often mistakenly mixed in the new age in the spiritual supermarket. Let's move forward. A friend tells us, I have memories, sometimes very vivid, of other times and places. Do you think these memories could be from past lives? I have experienced déjà vu all my life, and I wonder if these could also be associated with memories of other lives, perhaps parallel ones. When we talk about déjà vu, about this type of vivid memories that we can also have, evidently, it may be a manifestation of the reminiscence within us from a past life. We shared it in the monthly meeting last October. It is something we have also seen in other monthly meetings, that we do not have a memory of a past life. Firstly, because it would be impossible for our physical brain to hold memories of a life that our brain has not lived, because it is a life from another reincarnation. And furthermore, because spiritually, what is commonly referred to as the great forgetfulness occurs. The great forgetfulness means that spiritually, consciously, it is beneficial for us not to remember all the experiences we have lived in past lives, because it would block us in this life. If we remembered everything from previous lives, that memory would be so overwhelming that it would prevent us from living this life and ultimately extracting experiential value from it. Hence, only when we progress spiritually does that door to the memory of past lives begin to open. It is one of the series of faculties taught in the science of yoga, which gradually opens, lying latent within the human being, and it begins to manifest from our atmic spiritual dimension. It only becomes evident as we progress spiritually, because that is the only way those memories we start to have do not overwhelm us and prevent us from experiencing the current life. Well, when we take all this into account, it is also said that in our soul, there is a kind of a vault where all those experiences are stored. And evidently, our soul carries all those experiences manifested at the level of self-awareness, at the level of oil, recalling the metaphor given to us by Christ Jesus, which we have harvested throughout all our lives. And also, in our soul, there is like a kind of drawer, allow me this very colloquial expression, where those experiences are stored. And when the soul incarnates from life to life, this manifests as a reminiscence. In me, therefore, there is a reminiscence that my soul carries with it from the experiences lived. Not only the oil level of my soul, which is fundamental, but also this reminiscence. And that reminiscence can start to manifest sometimes, as mentioned in the question, usually like flashes. It's not that we perfectly remember past lives, but rather they appear as flashes related to previous incarnations. So what this friend is presenting to us, what is precisely being presented, is this possibility. And indeed, this possibility exists. And furthermore, it is also possible that when we have previously talked about parallel timelines, when we have discussed throughout the response to the previous question about parallel timelines with the two movies we have recommended, it may be that even though I am aware of a specific timeline, for example, the one related to the number 4 on the die, the other timelines are also unfolding. And in the world of dreams, there are like windows that open, interrelating what I am consciously experiencing and the other timelines that are unfolding. And from there, it may be that information about situations is reaching my memory that are unfolding in those other timelines. Sometimes the thing about Javi, the famous people of Javi, as referenced in the question, have to do with this. So indeed, although it is a topic we shouldn't obsess over, the memory of past lives can naturally come to us when it aligns with our spiritual development. And as much as possible, it shouldn't be forced. Deja vu situations can also occur due to the unconscious intercommunication that happens between the different timelines that are unfolding. Fifth and final question regarding this first section, this first block, about the birth of time and its presence in other realities. What was time like in previous humanities, Lemuria and Atlantis? Did they move in cycles like current humanity, or was it different? Could you give me an example? Was there spring, summer, autumn, and winter, or was it a single cycle? Well, the key factor for the answer to this question or these questions is already being provided in the question itself. The key factor is cycle. We shared in the session on the imposition that time is also related to movement. Everything is in motion in the cosmos, and that movement is not erratic, but rather it manifests in dead cycles. And to a large extent, what we call time, from the most conventional and mental point of view, is precisely related to these cycles. The annual cycle, the cycle of the seasons as posed in the question, etc., etc., etc. Short cycles, medium cycles, very prolonged cycles, and movement is expressed in cycles. In the previous humanities, it was exactly the same. Also in Atlantis, also in Lemuria, the humanity of those times evidently developed their life experience in the context of small cycles, intermediate cycles, and larger cycles. There is no difference with us. What does differ is in the duration of the cycles. For example, geology tells us that throughout Earth's history, days have not always lasted 24 hours. Instead, depending on geological components, the Earth in its rotation and in relation to its orbit around the Sun has developed the day in terms of different hours than those we are experiencing at present. There are even studies that claim there was a time when the days, in quotes, lasted 16 hours. Every 16 hours, the sun would rise and set, what is 24 hours today was 16. Therefore, in response to the question, it is possible that cycles in different eras have different durations. The cycles of the day, the cycles of the annual seasons, but those cycles continue to exist. Therefore, the basis and foundation are precisely the cyclical movements, we would say, that are maintained throughout different humanities, even if the specific duration of those cycles varies. Thus, friends, we move on to the second block of questions you have raised. Time as a vertical straight line, instantaneity, and as a circle or spiral. There are 4 issues related to this topic that you have formulated. A friend asked us, can all the incarnations of a person be happening at the same time in parallel? Well, it's an enormously interesting topic, and furthermore, another person complements it by telling us the following. I have heard that the different incarnations are projections that the soul makes simultaneously, as if they were different movie theaters with different films that the soul projects at the same time, so that if you heal something in one life, it would also affect the other lives. Could you tell me if you agree with this theory and if it would have to do with vertical time? All right. In relation to these two matters, in the text you're going to receive, they are question 6 and 7. I will answer them at the same time. Certainly, when we talk about the soul, we are talking about a dimension that is not physical material. The soul incarnates in the physical or material dimension, but we could say that its true world is not the physical or material dimension. What we understand as time is linked to the physical dimension in which we live. But the soul, even though it incarnates here, its characteristics, its substance, are intrinsically not of this plane, to put it in a way that we can all understand. From there, it is very possible that the soul, in its process of reincarnations, that process of soul reincarnations, is experienced by the soul in a non-linear chronological way, but in a way that has to do with that straight line, vertical or instantaneity that we mentioned. This is something absolutely feasible. We do not have elements of study, reference, or spiritual traditions that affirm it categorically, but by common sense it is coherent, that the soul's projections do not develop in chronology, but rather in the instantaneous. It is something we must admit as a valid and plausible hypothesis. From there, friends, another thing is how we live it. That is, how from the point of view of here and now, you and I live through that whole process. And the process of reincarnations, the process of reincarnation of the soul that is incarnated in me, the process of reincarnation of the soul that is incarnated in you, if we experience it, if we live it in terms of chronological succession. This is very important for us to keep in mind. The soul may have a development that unfolds in different time keys, but in this plane incarnated, and we who are the physical body consequence, like cars, as I like to say, of the incarnation of the driver of our dimension, micro-spiritual, when we talk about these kinds of things, we do have to admit, we do have to assume the chronological interpretation of the chain of lives through which a soul reincarnates. And all traditions have insisted on this. All spiritual traditions that speak to us of the chain of life, of reincarnations, all presented to us so that we can understand it and so that we can experience it. Extracting juice in terms of consciousness, they present it to us as something chronological, because it is the way in which the incarnation of the soul manifests in this plane where the human experience unfolds. Therefore, friends, we could say that just as in our current life the years follow one another, it may be that from a more global point of view, really, as shown in the movie Interstellar, which we already referenced in the presentation session, and to which we will return in a while at the end, because there is a person who makes a very interesting contribution in relation to this movie, Interstellar. Well, as demonstrated in the movie Interstellar, it may be that our experience is not a straight, chronological, horizontal line, but rather a line, straight, but vertical. I repeat, as demonstrated in the movie. This may be the case, but be careful, how do we live it? We clearly experience it as the succession of days, as the succession of weeks, as the succession of months, as the succession of years. Well, exactly the same should be said in relation to the soul and its incarnations. Regardless of whether the soul can truly operate within temporal parameters that are more linked to instantaneity, from the perspective of the reincarnation experience, it is like the years of our life, which we experience, we live, and we must also accept that it is so. from a chronological point of view, from a chain of chronological life. This is also interesting for another question, the eighth of this meeting, of this session, where a person asks us, is it possible for the soul, according to its evolutionary process, to decide to have an experience at any time in human history? Or in that soul process, is there indeed a chronological linearity to which souls must adapt the plans of their different incarnations? The answer is that there is indeed a chronological linearity to which souls adapt their reincarnation plans, their life chain. And this can be stated emphatically, because it is very important to consider that the evolution of each soul, the one incarnated in you, the one incarnated in me, is also part of a collective evolution. Because what we share when we talk about the end of this human generation, we will see it, then we will return to it in a while. Or when we talk about the parousia and the emergence of a new human cycle, of a new humanity on a restored earth. Notice, we are talking about there being an individual soul evolution, but within the framework of a collective evolution. So, indeed, when the soul incarnates, it does not do so in a random manner, from one era to another, back and forth, but rather its own evolutionary process goes in step with the evolutionary process of humanity. Evidently, each soul has its own level of oil, more or less, and humanity in its collective consciousness has whatever level of oil it may have, even though they are different things. The soul experiences its evolutionary process in the great cycles, as do the different humanities that make up and shape the human evolutionary process. So evolution is individual, but it is also collective. This is why the soul, its incarnation, occurs from era to era, precisely in step, not only with its individual evolution, but also with the collective evolution. The ninth question that arises, also enormously powerful, like all those we have analyzed so far, and those to come. Notice what this friend tells us. He says, what do you think about the fact that there are people who live in pi, circle, and others who live in phi, or the golden number, spiral? The entire universe moves in phi. PHI, the entire universe moves in phi. Planets, solar systems, we have the golden ratio in nature. I feel that if we move in phi, that is, if we accept that everything happens for a reason, everything has a why and a purpose, we get the most out of life itself. We remember that as infinite souls, we set ourselves experiences to make the most of them and fill the lamp with oil. We move through life and lives. In short, quite the opposite if we are in pi, living life after life without remembering what we are and repeating the same tests or experiences, without getting the most out of life, with a materialistic and ego-driven vision. And we move in a circle that is in pay. Attached is a link that very well illustrates the movement of our solar system. In short, there is a link that in the text you will receive tomorrow. You can consult. And what this person presents to us, I indeed make it my own. I admit that I had never reflected on it in the way it is presented to us, but once it was presented by this friend, and I have reflected on it, I completely agree. The point of view that this PHI, this phi, this golden ratio from which we were also taught so much, for example, by the great Leonardo da Vinci, applied to what is the development of consciousness, indeed, is to evolve in a spiral. That growing spiral, those circles that are not repetitive, but rather are expanding, which we mentioned in the presentation session. And then, as this person says, we start to squeeze the juice out of life itself, accepting that everything happens for a reason, that everything has a why and a purpose, that we are souls, that we set experiences to extract the juice and fill the lamp with oil, that we move through life and life itself. Quite the opposite of what the Psyche is, which we could indeed understand, as it is told to us in the matter, as a closed circle in itself, where the soul never really takes off. The soul fails to extract the juice from life because it has a materialistic and ego-driven vision that makes us move in circles. Totally agree. And very grateful to this person for having made this deep and very plausible reflection available to us. We thus enter the third and major block, the one with the majority of, in terms of the number of questions in these responses to questions in this monthly meeting. It is the third block that referred to Vital Chronos and Chiron. Let's go step by step. We are told in question number 10, which you will receive tomorrow. We are told by a friend, in classical mythology, Chronos and Saturn are the same. Chronos in Greek mythology, and Saturn in Roman mythology. What does it mean? What does it symbolize that Saturn devours his children? And we are told this theme was painted by Goya and Rubens, among others. Indeed, in what is classical Greek mythology, Chronos in Latin mythology is associated with Saturn. And well, indeed, as we are reminded in the question, Saturn devours his children. What could it mean that Chronos, Saturn, devours his children? Well, this is a topic that has been studied throughout history. And when we look at the great contributions that wise men and women have made over time on this matter, we can say that this mythological tale of Saturn devouring his children is an allegory about the fear of change and the play of the cycles of time. It's as if devouring his children had as a backdrop the temporal cycles, marked by Chronos with his linearity, and as if there were fear of what the passage of that temporality entails, the passage of those cycles of time. This as a key and fundamental element. Similarly, we are told that linked to Chronos are also the dynamics of power, the dynamics of influence, and that these dynamics of power, these dynamics of influence that unfold in Chronos also relate to that devouring of his children due to the implications these dynamics have in human life. There have also been authors who have spoken to us when they talk about that Saturn who devours his children, about the forces that lead to destruction, to make way for renewal. That is, not understanding the devouring of his children as killing them, but as the fact that their life ends by being devoured, but so that a new cycle begins, so that a new vital dynamic starts, so that a new experience begins. So fear of change, the cycle of time, the dynamics of power, and the forces that lead to destruction to make way for renewal are the major interpretations that have been given to this mythological tale of Saturn devouring his children. Another question, in what era of humanity has it already been lived? Has it already been lived in terms of the time of Chiron? Well, Kairos as spiritual time, which we discussed in the presentation session, comes into play, takes the spotlight, and relegates Chronos, and Kairos takes the spotlight, when we approach the end of a great cycle so that another great cycle can begin. And of course, we are in a scenario where we contemplate our current moment, the current humanity. And we talked about how perhaps the waterfall is not far away. In the example of the river we used in the presentation, the waterfall that marks the change of cycle is not far. The end of this human generation, as Christ said, so that a new human cycle can begin, the parousia, and a new humanity in a restored earth. Therefore, when we mention the current humanity, we think in terms of a waterfall that is about to arrive, and we know that when that waterfall is near, if it isn't already, Chronos will take a back seat, and Kairos possibly already takes control, which involves upheaval and a perception of time acceleration. Notice that the key is the waterfall. Has humanity experienced waterfalls before? Well, yes, of course, it has. Not with the spiritual dimension that this one will have, because this one opens the doors to a humanity that is, so to speak, at a much higher vibrational frequency. That new humanity in a restored earth, humanity has already evolved through different humanities. We have previously talked in connection with another question about Lemuria or Atlantis. Well, indeed, we have already experienced the presence of Kairos, for example, when Atlantis concludes, when Atlantis ends, so that the humanity in which we are currently incarnated can begin. There was also a time, a moment when Kairos took control. Therefore, in what era of humanity has it already been lived in terms of Kairos time? Well, every time we have transitioned from one humanity to another in the terms we have explained in other monthly meetings, from the polar humanity, the Hyperborean, there Kairos acted. From the Hyperborean to Lemuria, there Kairos was present. From Lemuria to Atlantis, there Kairos was present. From Atlantis to the current one, there Kairos was present. Therefore, this moment that we may be living, which perhaps is not very far from the prominence of Kairos in this humanity, has already occurred before. However, the dissonance is that this new waterfall opens a cycle that is substantively different because it has a higher vibrational frequency. Until now, when we transitioned from Atlantis to the current humanity, Kairos acted, but the new humanity has remained on a vibrational frequency line similar to the previous humanity. This will not be the case in the new waterfall, in this new action of Kairos, because evolutionarily it is now time to take a step towards an experience, a collective human experience of higher vibrational frequency. We have recalled this in the presentation of the meeting, and in response to your questions, we will return to it shortly. When we talk precisely about that waterfall, when we talk about the end of this human generation, when we talk about the parousia in line with your questions. Next, there are 5 questions that I will answer in the same way. One question is, in the current era of humanity, have we already begun to live in the spiritual time of Kairos, given the accelerated events happening on the planet? Another friend asks, are we already close to the final waterfall? Another person mentions, since the pandemic, since the 2020 pandemic, I have noticed that time has accelerated enormously. However, other people do not notice any of this, and for them, time continues the same. Why do some of us feel this great acceleration of time and others do not? There is a friend who tells us, I feel like the days are flying by, the weeks, the months, the years. Do you see any relationship between the people who perceive this predominance of Kairos over Chronos and the souls, people, incarnated souls, who will successfully experience the parousia to enjoy the new generation on the restored earth? And finally, another person tells us, could there come a time when there is a dissociation of time for each person according to their level of consciousness? Well, regarding all this, friends, it is possible. I am not the one to assure it, but I do submit it as a hypothesis for your consideration. Where we are already beginning to live spiritual time, given the acceleration of events, given the perception of acceleration that we are experiencing. We shared it in the presentation 2 weeks ago, and I pointed out again now. Are we already close to the final waterfall? Possibly. It is not so far away. But of course, since we are talking about Kairos and not Chronos, we cannot put it on the calendar. No, no one knows the day or the hour, but we can perceive that rather than it being near, I should say that it is not far off, that waterfall which opens the end of this human generation and the start after the parousia of a new humanity on a restored earth. As for other people who do not realize this and for whom time seems to continue the same, and perhaps we talk to them about Chronos and Kairos and how we perceive that time is accelerating, etc., etc. Well, they don't understand anything. They might even think we're crazy. This is related, evidently, as is implicitly suggested in this and the following question. This is related to the state of consciousness. Indeed, with a higher state of consciousness, there is a greater awareness of what is happening, a greater awareness in relation to oneself, and a greater awareness in relation to what happens externally. And with a higher state of consciousness, there is a greater ability to perceive the signs of the times and what is happening externally. Therefore, the fact that some of us feel this great acceleration of time and others do not is indeed linked to the state of consciousness, to the level of oil of each soul in particular. And regarding the fact that the people who can perceive Kairos, the acceleration, are somehow those who are called to successfully experience the parousia, to enjoy the new generation on the restored earth. We could say that it is not a definitive indicator, but it is a substantive indicator to perceive the acceleration as the fact I just shared that our soul is having. I am not saying it already has it, but at least it is having or is approaching, or it may even have surpassed the minimum required level of oil in the oil lamp that metaphorically is the soul to live, the new human cycle, to enjoy that new humanity on the restored earth. Therefore, yes, it is very possible that becoming aware, realizing the play of Kairos, the acceleration of time, is an indicator, even if we do not call it Kairos, because we do not have that knowledge. But the fact that we perceive time is accelerating is a sign of a state of consciousness. It is an indicator in turn that we are preparing or are already prepared to live through this process and enjoy this new humanity on the restored earth. And as for whether there can come a time when there is a dissociation of time for each person, according to their level of consciousness, it is the parousia. In the parousia, this will reach its peak. Friends, the parousia entails and implies the cut or severance, the elevator that goes up, that new humanity with a vibrational frequency in tune with the new vibrational frequency of the earth, that elevator colloquially going up. And those who are in the elevator and go up, and those who do not enter the elevator. In their soul's free will, they do not enter the elevator. Notice the tremendous dissociation this causes. It is not just a dissociation in terms of time, in terms of Chronos and Kairos. It is of the very vibrational reality, of the very immediate reality, and its vibrational frequency. Now, when we talk about the parousia again, we will return to this matter. They say, another block of questions. I consider myself very organized, and I enjoy it. Despite this, I increasingly feel that time is not as productive for me as it used to be. I wake up earlier and earlier. Malcolm, try to relieve myself of extra tasks at work, in try to have more relaxed afternoons, free, living a simple life, etc. And even so, despite achieving all my goals, time flies by from days to years. Any advice? Another friend tells us, in this kairos we are living, we are forced to choose the most important activities to carry out. How to select these activities and how to deal with the criticism of the society we are in or not immersed in when we choose not to worship the speed it imposes on us. Another question. The feeling that time is passing faster can be overwhelming. It seems I can't manage to do everything I need to do during the day or week. Do you think it's appropriate not to do so much? Or how can one live this acceleration without speeding up? And finally, a fourth question linked to the one I just shared, where we are asked, could you share some tips on how to make better use of time in daily life to be more efficient in our tasks and thus have more time and peace for transcendent matters? Well, in response to these four questions, which you will find tomorrow in the text Kiko will send you, I dare to advise 5 things, 5 life practices related to the issues and suggestions raised in these questions and observations kindly sent by these friends. First advice, prune the agenda as much as possible. With Kairos in full action, and it is in action, everything is very accelerated. It is extremely important that we take pruning the agenda very seriously. And this is something, obviously, that is up to each one. Certainly, there are things in the agenda, perhaps many, that we cannot prune. Personal, family, work obligations, or activities we want to carry out, which we will not prune. However, surely there are other things in our agenda, in our life dynamics that we can prune. First advice, prune the agenda as much as possible. It's advice I apply to myself continuously, and every time I prune, I realize I have room to prune a little more. And when I prune a little more, I realize I have room to prune a little more. It's not about going from nothing to everything, but about advancing gradually. But to advance gradually, you have to start, you have to begin. Therefore, first advice, prune the agenda as much as possible. Second advice, organize the agenda as much as possible. If the first is to prune the agenda as much as possible, the second advice I submit to your consideration is to organize the agenda as much as possible. Look, friends, since I was very little, in this particular matter of organization, I had the wonderful influence of my father, a good man, a good person who was able to carry out many activities, always in a very coherent, very effective, and very efficient way. And since I was very little, I remember him telling me, Emilio, son, every minute you spend organizing, with every minute you spend organizing, you gain an hour. For every minute you spend organizing the agenda, organizing things, you gain an hour. I don't know if the exact relationship, mathematically speaking, is this, but I have been able to verify throughout my life the truth contained in this statement. Therefore, it's not only about pruning the agenda as much as possible, but also organizing the agenda as much as possible. We prune, and what remains that we cannot prune, we organize as much as possible. Third advice, practice acceptance in the face of delays and unforeseen events. I think this is also very important. We prune the agenda as much as possible. We organize it as much as possible, but then in day-to-day life, things happen. Things occur, there are unforeseen events, there are circumstances, or it may be that when organizing, we haven't calculated the time well, especially when there is this acceleration we are experiencing. Well, as a third piece of advice, friends, in the face of delays, in the face of unforeseen events, acceptance. Let's not get angry. Let there be no anger, no annoyance. In my daily practice, this happens to me enormously. For example, I give an example related to activities associated with these monthly meetings. I have been preparing for some time now the extraordinary summer workshop on Mary Magdalene. I knew that to prepare the contents of that extraordinary summer workshop, I would have to do some research because I didn't want to go to the common places we find in more or less fictional texts or in certain videos circulating on social networks. I want to do an exhaustive research and investigation, going to the early Christian texts, both canonical and apocryphal, etc., etc. And I had already calculated that this would take me a long time. And I started at Christmas. In my agenda organization, I assumed that from Christmas until the end of February was the time it would take me to write the text that will serve as the basis for that summer monthly meeting, which we will develop precisely on the day dedicated to Mary Magdalene, July 22nd. Well, look, we are on April 17th, and the text is not finished. Why is it not finished? Because unforeseen events have arisen, unforeseen events that are wonderful. They have been new texts, a text that is leading you to another, a new inquiry, a new line of investigation. And I am convinced that for the rest of April, I will still need to focus my study time on that summer workshop about Mary Magdalene. So something I organized in my agenda to finish by the end of February, I will finish in quotes with luck by the end of April. Well, this must be accepted. We have to accept that often in our schedule organization, there are circumstances, there are unforeseen events. They don't have to be things that our mind labels as negative, but they arise and appear. And this must be accepted with productivity. This must be accepted as being part of the very dynamics of life. So notice that we are already following the thread of these issues that our friends have raised. We already have 3 pieces of advice, if you allow me to call it that. First, trim the schedule as much as possible. Second, organize the schedule as much as possible. Third, practice acceptance in the face of delays and unforeseen events that may arise. And we still have 2 pieces of advice left, which I also consider important. The fourth, in the execution of tasks and activities, prioritize those that we have in the queue due to obligation of any kind of obligation. Look, we have trimmed the schedule of activities as much as possible. From there, we have a series of activities to develop, which is what I call the waiting queue. So, in that waiting queue, where do we start? When organizing ourselves, where do we start? Well, we start with those that we have there in the waiting queue. Due to obligation, these might be things we don't want to do, or things related to the lifestyle we're in and don't feel like doing, but they have to be done. Now, I'll give you a simple example for those of us living in Spain. The period for filing the income tax return now, the tax on personal income has opened, right? Well, then we have to file the income tax return. Do I feel like filing an income tax return? Well, no, I don't feel like it, to be honest. It's part of the obligation. So, since it's part of the obligation, I give it priority. I give priority to what I have pending to do, which I have in the waiting queue due to obligation. And this obligation can be very different, it can be very diverse. I gave an example related to a fiscal obligation, but there can be many things we don't feel like doing, but we have to do. So this first, and this takes precedence. And finally, the fifth and last piece of advice, enjoy those activities we undertake by our own choice, like in my case, for example, the study of Mary Magdalene. I'm doing it for enjoyment. Not to mention when these activities are related to or tied to our gifts and talents, which are the ones that generate enthusiasm and bring us joy and enjoyment when carrying them out, when developing them, when putting them into practice? Very modestly, I believe these 5 pillars are fundamental for us to experience the acceleration of time that Kairos implies in the best possible way in terms of consciousness. Prune the agenda as much as possible, organize the agenda as much as possible, practice acceptance in the face of delays and unforeseen events, in the execution of tasks and activities, prioritize those we have in the waiting queue due to obligation, whatever type of obligation it may be. And 5th, enjoy those we undertake by our own choice, especially those tied to our gifts and talents. Once we've gotten the obligatory tasks out of the way, we then have a margin, a space for enjoyment, for joy, to carry out those that are not related to obligation, but so to speak, with devotion. What we feel like doing, what interests us, what is tied to our gifts and talents, and what truly generates enthusiasm in us. Having said that, we continue with other questions that arise. And here are 2 questions that I will also answer together. We are now on 21 and 22. When I was a child, a friend tells us, I felt that time went very slowly. Now, as an adult, I have had experiences of perceiving time cuts or that time does not pass. I look at the clock, do many things, and look at the clock again, and only 3 minutes have passed, or I look at the clock, feel like I do very little, and hours have passed. Could it be that we have the ability to lengthen or shorten time according to our need? This is what a friend tells us. And another person tells us, some years ago, the idea came to my mind that the future is a continuous present. But besides that, many times I feel the time paused. Honestly, I don't know if it can be categorized like that. But the experience of being paused in an instant while I walk and feel all that stillness within me leads me to call it that. Could it be that each of us has an inner time? Notice how interesting, how powerful these 2 questions are. Certainly, there is the whole study of time that we develop in the exposition, and in line with which your questions have arisen, I am responding as much as possible in this session. And that is there is material time and mental time and vital time, and there is material time and spiritual time, and there is chronos, and there is kairos, etc., etc. And that is undeniable. However, there is also a subjective perception that indeed has to do, as mentioned in one of these questions, with each of us, and that each of us also has to do with how we live the moment, the experience, or the activity. For example, we have talked about gifts and talents. Each of us has our own, and they are very varied and all equally important. Well, when we engage in an activity related to our gift and talent, time passes very quickly, time flies. This is a reality. I start writing about Mary Magdalene, consulting one thing, consulting another, and the time I had scheduled, X time I had scheduled during the morning, during the afternoon. Before I realize it, it has already passed. But has this time already passed? It might have been 3.5 or 4 hours. 3-4 hours have already passed. Well, yes, they have already passed. And why do I have the perception that it flew by? This has nothing to do with the acceleration of time as a metaphysical backdrop of Kairos, but rather I am particularly engaging in an activity that is very pleasing to me, that produces enthusiasm, and by producing enthusiasm, time seems to go very fast. On the other hand, surely, when I do the income tax return, time will seem very slow to me. That is, that task in quotes will feel slow to me when carrying it out. Why? Because I will not experience it with enthusiasm. It is an obligation that I have to do, to dedicate whatever time it takes. And I am sure that when I do it, that time will seem too long to me. I can calculate that in an hour and a half, that will be done at most, right? In my particular case, an hour, not much. Well, that hour I know will feel very long to me, in quotes. It's as if time in this case is not shortening, but rather stretching. It has nothing to do with chronos. It has nothing to do with kairos. It has nothing to do with anything metaphysical.
It has to do with my own experience, with my own way of living, harmony with the color, with the tone, with the characteristic of the activity I am carrying out. And finally, the pause, the sensation of pause. That has to do with an increasing capacity we have in consciousness. When living in the present moment, even if we have activities, even if the acceleration of time is happening, even if chronological time, the stopwatch, and the calendar are running, or we are living in a different way, it can somehow be identified with that pausing, with that pause, that state, that way of living things more calmly, more serenely. And all this, I repeat, does not contradict or conflict with the great notions of time we are analyzing, but rather complements it. Therefore, one thing is kairos, and another thing are other things. And we will go to that in line with other questions that follow, which will help us understand what we have shared. We could say that in the response to these last two questions, you will find it in the text you will receive. The answer would be that one thing is kairos, and another the changes in the notion of time according to the type of activity, obligation, or choice, gifts, and talents. And also include what is that practice of living more in the here and now, and that pausing we have mentioned. And there are two questions that also relate to this. What do you think about the happiness musicians feel in their hearts when they are playing a musical instrument, especially the violin, the guitar, the piano, or using their voice as a musical instrument? They enter into joy and are in those musical moments in a spiritual time outside of Chronos. Well, what we have just shared fits perfectly with this question. These musicians, these people who are playing the violin, the guitar, the piano, their own voice, they are enjoying their talent, they are exercising a gift or a talent, and indeed time passes very quickly. And this has nothing to do with the metaphysical aspect of Chronos, but with what the enthusiasm generated in us by exercising our innate faculties and capacities, our gifts and talents means. And there is another friend also related to what we have just discussed, who tells us spiritual time is related to the spiritual experiences that mystics live or have lived, people with the ability to see the spiritual world. What for us is an instant, for them is an experience of more intensity. For example, the visions of the girls of Garabandal, the experiences of Saint Teresa of Jesus in her ecstasies, etc. Well, we said a couple of minutes ago that one thing is kairos and another the changes in the notion of time that we each experience according to, depending on the type of activity, obligation, choice, gifts, and talents, etc. Well, regarding this last point, we could say that one thing is kairos and another is, on one hand, the mystical experience, and on the other, the experience of samadhi. Let's see, one thing is kairos, and another is the mystical experience. The mystical experience is what the great masters, the great mystics have taught us, and those mystical experiences tell us, as we have shared in various meetings, that it manifests in seeing God in all things and seeing all things with the eyes of God. And that mystical experience is different from kairos. It is a deeper view of reality. It is the divine essence, as St. John of the Cross said, that becomes present. And through that divine essence, we increasingly, from the presence of that divine essence, we live life more fully. And this has a series of consequences for us, but it must be differentiated from kairos. One thing is kairos, which is something global, metaphysical, that affects the world and all of humanity during times of cycle change, of approaching a cycle change. And another thing is the mystical experience, which is a personal, intimate experience of each individual that one either has or does not have. Similarly, kairos must be differentiated from the experience of samadhi. Samadhi, in the terminology of the science of yoga, ecstasy, as pointed out in one of the questions we just shared regarding the experiences of Saint Teresa of Jesus. High contemplation, as Saint John of the Cross called it, that is one thing. This type of experience is one thing, and kairos is another. It is true that in a state of samadhi, ecstasy, or high contemplation, time is completely and absolutely broken. We enter a kind of no time. And this is because, as you know, the science of yoga defines it very well. Samadhi is, as we already mentioned in the December monthly meeting, and especially in the extraordinary Christmas workshop that we held and shared on December 28th, samadhi consists of the disappearance of the mind's self-presence. That mind which is always making itself present, stops making itself present, it disappears. It's not that the mind disappears, it's the self-presence of the mind that disappears. And with the disappearance of that self-presence of the mind, consciousness is left liberated. It's the example we gave in the winter workshop, that the mind is like glasses. And when we talk about the disappearance of the self-presence of the mind, it's that the glasses are absolutely clean. There are the glasses, but it's as if they weren't there. And then we see reality as it truly is. And of course, by seeing reality as it truly is, what are the mental perceptions linked to what concerns us here? Time has no place. Everything works, everything unfolds in a different way. But this type of experience of samadhi, ecstasy, or high contemplation is one thing, and kairos is another. As I repeat, one thing is kairos, and another thing is the mystical experience or experiences. Another friend tells us, can we also access kairos through music of high spiritual vibration? For example, the Ave Maria or choir songs of special joy. Could you recommend any? Well, what we can access through music with substance, depth, and high vibrational frequency is not kairos. We return to what was mentioned before. One thing is kairos, and another thing is the mystical experience or meditation experiences. We could say that this high vibration music is related not to kairos, but to experiences, in quotes, mystical of greater or lesser level, or meditation experiences also of greater or lesser level. It is not related to kairos, but to this type of experience. And this person asks me to recommend some song, some high vibration music. Well, in the text you will receive tomorrow, I allow myself to recommend one. I could recommend many, but anyway, to focus on something specific, there you have a link where there is an audio video on YouTube that I have posted through a friend on YouTube, and where there is a type of music that I believe meets these characteristics of high spiritual vibration that is asked of us in the question. Question 26, with which we conclude this section related to Chronos and Kairos. Can the increasing use of quantum computers somehow influence a modification or dilation of spiritual time, whose behavior linked to consciousness seems more like quantum time to me? I am obviously not in possession of the truth, but to this person, friends, I would dare to answer, no, that quantum time, the ever-increasing capacity of the computers with those quantum computers, is something that always has to do with material time. And another thing completely different is kairos. I believe they should not be confused, just as they should not be confused. And I take this opportunity to emphasize it, the technologies of matter with the technologies of consciousness. Current humanity, the scientific technical revolution, pero technological development, though, are always advances that are occurring in the technologies of matter. And what the great masters have taught us is that there is another type, in quotes, of technologies, which are the technologies of consciousness. At some point, I have advised watching the movie The Green Beautiful, which is freely available on the internet. That movie, The Green Beautiful, highlights that there are technologies of consciousness that are completely different from the technologies of matter, and that are far superior in their capabilities, possibilities, and manifestations of consciousness technology. This humanity has a limited level of consciousness. At that limited level of consciousness, we are clinging to the technologies of matter. Certainly, we are developing the technologies of matter a lot, but they remain technologies of matter. Surely, in the new humanity, after the parousia, in the new human cycle, we will know how to develop technologies of consciousness. In this movie, The Free Planet, there are already some very striking examples, and it is also a very entertaining and pleasant film to watch. Surely, many of you have enjoyed it. We thus enter the fourth block by spiritual time and parousia. Regarding this fourth block, there are 8 issues. The first of them, which is already number 27 of those we are addressing in this meeting. Spiritual time is related to the underlying time of the present moment, with the timeless, with the permanent, with the immutable, although there is also movement. Is that where cumulative time, future memories, and Akashic records take place? Well, cumulative time is indeed linked to spiritual time, without any doubt, indeed. As for future memories, what can be premonitions and what can be Akashic records, they belong to another realm of consciousness. I'm not saying there isn't some type of interrelation, but it has to do with another realm of consciousness. I remind you, because we have shared it in some other monthly meeting, I remind you, friends, when we talk about the emergence of the universe, which astrophysics and also spirituality tell us about, that spirituality does indeed tell us that the first thing that emerges, which science calls cosmic inflation, the first thing that emerges after the vacuum fluctuation that astrophysics talks about. Astrophysics says that cosmic inflation arises where there are still no particles in the sense that we give to the term today. There is some type of substance that astrophysics does not quite know what it is. They call them inflatons. Since it is within cosmic inflation, they call them inflatons. But it is not very well known what these inflatons are. They are like the harbinger of particles. The pre-particles, no, still a state. We wouldn't even call elemental like in an embryo, so to speak. Well, in the spiritual realm, this same thing is, which describes to us by saying that the verb, the vibration, the pure and primordial admiration gives rise not to what is called cosmic inflation, but rather gives rise to the first emanation. And the swelling, that cosmic inflation of astrophysics, is called the egg of creation. Well, in spiritual tradition, the substance of that egg of creation, the substance of that globe that has swollen, which is what astrophysics calls inflatons, in spiritual tradition is called Akasha. Akasha, which is where the expression Akashic comes from, and where the Akashic records also originate. Therefore, Akasha is like a primordial substance that emerges in the first emanation, in the primordial universe, in the primordial cosmos. And from there, as the universe comes after the reheating, within the cosmic inflation that originates the Big Bang, and with the Big Bang, which is already the configuration of the cosmos as we use it, this is what in spiritual traditions is described as the second and third imagination. And what is indicated to us in the traditions is that this Akasha does not dilute, it does not disappear. The universe, the cosmos as we know it, is being configured, but Akasha remains there like a kind of carpet, like a kind of backdrop. So that at the present moment, that Akasha is also like the backdrop of the cosmos. And it is in Akasha where it is impregnated. That primordial substance is impregnated. It gathers everything experienced, everything lived in the development of the universe. And as it operates in a realm where we are talking about Akasha as the first emanation, it is where time has not yet emerged. We have seen it again today in the first question precisely of this meeting. Akasha does not operate in terms of time. It operates in terms of no time, so it has everything recorded. What we call the past, what we call the present, and what we call the future are all recorded. Hence, precisely, this possibility that in the Akashic records we find information about the entire history of the universe in terms of past, present, and future. This is what the traditions that have delved the most into this teach us. Another different matter, friends, is who has the spiritual capacity, because this is a spiritual capacity, to access those Akashic records. And indeed, we are also told in the science of yoga and in various traditions that we have the latent faculty to access that Akashic record. But that latent faculty only becomes evident with our development of consciousness, with our spiritual development. Not through forced techniques, not through forced mechanisms, no. The only path is spiritual development, the expansion of consciousness. Therefore, more than once in these meetings, I have warned against seeking shortcuts, trying to access these records when we are not truly in a position to access them. And if spiritually we are not yet in a condition to access them, we should not attempt to do so, because it will turn against us. That is to say, the spiritual and the conscious do not self-limit us because they don't want to. No, no, no. Not at all. Absolutely not. But simply that it is not the right time, that we need to mature consciously and evolve mentally and spiritually so that we can reach that moment. That's all I can share with you regarding this very interesting topic. From here, friends, there are 4 questions that are closely related to the end of this human generation, with the parousia that we mentioned earlier, etc., etc. I will read them and make a global concentration on all 4. What would be the signs for the end of this human generation? Another question, how does the parousia occur? Another matter, could you be more specific about the upheavals you mentioned for the end of this human generation? And the 4th and final question of this subset of issues that I have grouped, which is the 31st of this session, is it what will trigger the culmination of spiritual time to give rise to a new humanity? Is it the accumulation of increasingly dystopian events until it becomes completely unbearable and evident to everyone? Or does it depend on a certain percentage of the population reaching the minimum level of consciousness, critical mass, to be able to transition to that new humanity? And until then, we will continue in an ever-growing dystopia. Well, in the text, I have allowed myself to create a sort of summary outline of what the major phases of the latest events or the final events of this human generation are, and the emergence of the new humanity through the parousia. In the text, it is reminded that there is a first phase, which we could call the times of desolation, the usual evils, but with more intensity. Hunger, yes, but with more intensity than ever, affecting a larger number of people. Wars, yes, as always, but more than ever, because numerically it affects a larger number of people. Damage to nature and the environment, yes, as always, but now more than ever. The times of desolation, inequality, social injustice, yes, there has always been, but in the times of desolation, more than ever. This would be like the prelude to the process that leads, or that we enter into the final phase that leads us to the waterfall, the times of desolation. the usual evils with more intensity than ever. Next comes the tribulation, or the Great Tribulation. It is where the usual evils with more intensity than ever are also joined by new evils that humanity has never experienced before, never lived before. For example, an example of these new evils could be the monitoring, domination, and control of the population and citizens through technology. One of these new evils could be the perverse use of technology to manipulate the collective unconscious. Indeed, with two good examples, such as genetic manipulation, it can also be a good example. That is to say, at this moment, it may be that we have lived through times of desolation, the seas as always, but more intensely than ever, and that we have even already reached that phase of great tribulation, where evils are summarized that humanity has never experienced before. Similarly, in this phase of tribulation, it is said that the division of Satan will occur. The division of Satan has to do with the fact that the involutive not only interferes, not only tries to lead souls astray from the perspective of the hot, the luciferic, the deluded, mental distortions, the passionate, violence, screams and cults, what is related to blood with violence. This is typical of the involutive, the Luciferian or luciferic. But when we are told about the division of Satan in times of tribulation, it has to do with the fact that a new form of interference also appears, which is Ahriman, the Ahrimanic, as Rudolf Steiner very well taught. And the Ahrimanic influence is not hot, but rather cold, the cooling of the human spirit. And that's precisely where these new evils come into play, which stem from technologies that are misused or promoted for misuse. Virtual reality and artificial reality that pulls us away from the real world and without us realizing it, dries us out, cools us down, cooling the human spirit. This would be a sign or a signal within the time of tribulation. Similarly, we are told that tribulation will reach a peak of insecurity, uncertainty, and distortion. And then, those who dominate the world under the involutive baton will make a proclamation of peace and security, a proclamation of peace and security. This is perhaps closely related to that new world order that is in a very advanced state of configuration. That new world order, which surely also has to do with the 2030 agenda, and that at a certain point, after experiencing a hurricane of rapidly increasing magnitude with one crisis, then another crisis with a situation of uncertainty, with another circumstance of instability and fear, one after another, one after another. When we are already exhausted by so much upheaval, we are told by those who dominate this world that they have reached something that will guarantee us peace and security on a global scale. We would say that this is almost the final point of what is the times of tribulation, of the Great Tribulation, the proclamation of peace and security. And that proclamation of peace and security, as the Christian texts tell us very well, will neither bring peace nor security, but will be the prelude to the triumph of the beast, the triumph of the beast. What some Christian texts strictly call the Great Tribulation, and in some of these texts, it is even said that this triumph of the beast will last 7 years, having two halves. The first part, where the beast will already appear, but will pose as someone very benign, very kind. And the second part, another 3.5 years, where it will reveal what that beast truly is, under the orders of the satanic and Satan, acting without any limitations and openly showing its true nature. There it is mentioned, as we have already discussed in other monthly meetings, that this beast will have a configuration like a political institutional governing entity, but with an influence to enter the world. And the second beast will appear, working by delegation of the first, and it will have a more spiritual profile, deceiving people from a spiritual standpoint. We are told that both beasts will be driving apostasy, the expulsion of the transcendent, much more radically than has been done so far, promoting a collusion with iniquity. It is there where the Christian texts tell us, beware, because with that iniquity promoted in the triumph of the beast, you will have to coexist. But coexistence is one thing, and collusion is another. Do not fall into collusion. Do not make the belief systems, the paradigms and visions of that beast and that iniquity your own. In short, do not make the guidelines, behaviors, and life habits that will be promoted your own. That's where it fits. We are also told that in this context, false Christs and false prophets, driven by the second beast, will appear, causing much confusion among people. And the famous mark of the beast will also appear, which they will want everyone to carry on their hand or forehead, without which one cannot buy or sell, as we have also discussed in other monthly meetings. And all this will culminate in an attack against those who do not profess the single thought, the single faith, in quotes, that this beast will want to impose and will attack the righteous, the conscious people. We must not make the mark of the beast, nor the paradigms, nor the habits and life practices. They want our own. And precisely when the righteous are attacked, when the conscious are attacked, the parousia occurs. The parousia, as we have shared in the presentation of this monthly meeting, will have a lot to do, not only, but will have a significant factor in the role of the Earth's vibrational frequency. We said 2 weeks ago that the Earth is increasing its vibrational frequency. It is doing so drop by drop. So it is not something very evident. It is true that science, scientists, geologists are realizing that things are happening in relation to the polar axis, the Earth's magnetic core. They highlight that something is happening. The Schumann resonances, other scientific contributions, speak to us of this increase in the Earth vibrational frequency. And it is drop by drop, drop by drop, drop by drop, at a specific moment. The waterfall, we do not know the day or the hour, but when the waterfall arrives, that will be the waterfall. There will be a drop that overflows the glass, and when the glass overflows, Mother Earth will raise her vibrational frequency. It is when the new vibrational frequency of the Earth is absolutely manifested. Mother Earth becomes the new Earth, a new Earth with a higher vibrational frequency. And being a new Earth with a higher vibrational frequency, only those incarnated souls, those people, incarnated souls, or those who are not incarnated at that moment, but who have already reached the level of oil through lived experiences, and who will be able to incarnate in that new humanity, in the restored new Earth, because they have vibrational harmony with the new vibrational frequency of the Earth. This is described in Christian texts, this elevation, this peak moment of the parousia, as a great lightning that will be seen across the entire planet, that will travel the planet from east to west. And also the perception that the stars in the sky are moving. This has to do with the experience of that vibrational transition we just referred to. We could say that it is the experience of having entered the elevator and being able to ascend in the elevator to that new humanity, to the restored Earth. What we will perceive will be that immense burst of light, this sensation that the stars in the sky are moving. In reality, it is we ourselves who are moving, in quotes, through that vibrational transition, through that vibrational leap. And this is what is described in relation to the parousia. So I have just summarized very succinctly. I advise you to go to the monthly meetings where we have focused on this topic, in a monographic way, but in any case, I have just made a summary that I will repeat tomorrow in the text that Kiko will send. You will receive answers to questions 28, 29, 30, and 31. And we continue because we still have about 10 questions left, a little more, a dozen questions. Will it be during the parousia that what is described in the first letter to the Corinthians will occur about mortal bodies being transformed into immortal ones in the blink of an eye? Specifically, I have gathered the quote. No, I have included it in the text that Kiko will send. This friend is referring to the first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 15, verses 52, 53, and 54. And Pablo Betanzos tells us in this text, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. And when this corruptible has put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then the saying that is written will be fulfilled: death is swallowed up in victory, is integrated, is overcome, is death by victory. Well, this preciousness announces to us not the parousia, but what comes immediately after the parousia. The parousia gives rise to the new earth on the restored earth. And there, even from not only a spiritual point of view, but from a physical point of view, there will be a transformation. When we are in the new humanity, it is indicated to us that in this new humanity, there will be no illness, there will be no death. Our bodies, in quotes, will be incorruptible, indeed, as it was before the Adamic estrangement, as it was before original sin. Death arrives. What are the corruptible bodies? Death arrives from the estrangement from the divine and the supernatural. We will talk about this in the next monthly meeting. We will give some outlines in the next monthly meeting, in the monthly meeting that we will hold starting Thursday, May 8th. And when the new humanity becomes a reality, it will entail what we have read, that we will have bodies. Our etheric body will have transformed, in quotes, and this will lead to a physical body where illness and death will not be experienced. So this phrase, this expression, these verses of Paul, we cannot strictly link them to the parousia, but to the new humanity, to the new human cycle, to the new humanity on the restored earth that comes immediately afterward. Another friend tells us, at the moment of the parousia, if you have not disembodied and your oil lamp has the required level, do you pass directly to the new human generation? Or do you have to disembody first and then reincarnate in the new humanity? Well, the new humanity on the restored earth will be enjoyed by those people, lay souls, who are incarnated and who are in the elevator and go up with the elevator in the way we just shared. Right? Question. And if when the parousia occurs, my soul is disembodied, well, exactly the same. It will depend on the level of oil. If you have the level, minimum required level of oil, even if you are not incarnated at the specific moment when the parousia occurs, your soul will directly join the new humanity. Your soul will incarnate in the new humanity. This is what the sacred texts tell us very clearly. We will access the new earth. Those souls that have the minimum required level of oil, whether they are incarnated at that moment or disembodied at that moment, both will converge and both will be part of that new humanity in the restored earth. Making a comparison, another point, making a comparison with what a human life is, with its cycles of birth, growth, or evolution, and death, I then understand that planet Earth is the vehicle of that consciousness that evolves on a cosmic planetary level, and once its cycle of evolution is complete, it will leave this vehicle or physical planet just as we leave the physical body. In this way, the planet would be a corpse, as it seems the moon is. How and where would that consciousness continue its evolution, of which we, I understand, are a part? Certainly. In the planets, Mother Earth, for example, is embodied. What I like to call a supraplanetary essence, a soul spiritual dimension, we could say, a supraplanetary essence of enormous magnitude with an evolutionary process already undergone and developed, enormously powerful. And indeed, the life that unfolds on Mother Earth, there will be a moment that it will end. That our evolutionary process takes place on Mother Earth. But when the human cycle of ours has reached the 7th humanity, we are in the 5th, the new humanity will be the 6th. It is said that there will even be a 7th, which will represent the culmination of human evolution, and that we will live from what we truly are, putting our divine essence into practice. All of this almost certainly will happen before the earth ends. The earth will continue its life. This human process will have concluded, but the earth will continue its life. It is possible that group souls today are in the process of individualization. It may even be that they form other humanities in the future. Group souls that are currently in the animal world, in their evolutionary process, may become leaves of the tree, may come to have the entity of individualized souls. And it may be on this earth where a new humanity develops within eons of time. It cannot be ruled out at all. What I mean by this is that the earth has a very long life cycle. The geologists say it is about 4,550,000,000 years old, and it still has quite a bit left. But certainly, even though its life process spans eons, it is born, develops, and at some point it will, in quotes, die. A death that for the superplanetary essence, as it relates to my spiritual soul dimension ritual of the death of this Emilio, saving the scales, it's the same. When the physical death of the planet occurs, the supraplanetary essence will continue its path, not by incarnating in another planet. And indeed, we are told that the supraplanetary essence currently incarnated in Mother Earth was previously incarnated in the moon. It was a planet in the strict sense. And when that planet, so to speak, dies, it moves on to develop its next evolutionary cycle, its next link in the chain of life of that supraplanetary essence in Mother Earth. And when Mother Earth ends, will that supraplanetary essence continue its path by incarnating in another planet? It could be. Incarnating in a larger celestial body, perhaps in a star, perhaps in a sun. Well, it could be. But certainly, it's important to consider this evolutionary process because it tells us that the Earth, here and now, has a supraplanetary essence with which we are interacting, but it is a supraplanetary essence that has its own levels of development on a scale that is very different from ours, even though it is evidently interacting with ours and providing support. Notice what the new Earth is, what it is, in the elevation of its vibrational frequency, supporting our evolutionary process and our process of consciousness. And we finally enter the section of other questions with 8. What is true about anomalies, temporal anomalies? Time travel is talked about as history. They are very entertaining. Can you comment? Well, the technology of consciousness does have the ability to live in immediacy and to develop experience in immediacy. Technology of consciousness. The technologies of matter, which, as we mentioned before, are the ones present in this society, the ones in this world, personally. It's a personal opinion. I don't want to convince anyone of anything, but I believe that the technologies of matter do not have that capability. They do not have the ability to turn it around and live in immediacy, because being technology of matter, they are fully immersed in material time. And that is related to chronology, with everything that implies and represents. Therefore, if there is any experience of time travel, it would be like a kind of hint, like a sort of note, not from the technologies of matter, but from the technologies of consciousness. What do you think about the idea that we have 108 lives assigned to achieve self-realization, and that if after living them all we have not awakened, we undergo an involutionary path until we reset and start all over again? Well, to this friend, I say from the heart, Madra and soul, that I give it no credibility. I do not find it plausible that we have an exact number of lives assigned, 108, no more, no less. And that if we haven't made the most of it, then we go back to the beginning. No tradition speaks to us about going back to the beginning. We are told that there will be a specific moment when evolutionarily the moment of the waterfall, the moment of the elevator will arrive, and those who take advantage of that moment, spiritually speaking, will be part of the new cycle. And those who do not, it will be a sign that they have gone against the direction of life, against the flow of life. And if they do not correct their path, life will gradually move away from them like a leaf that goes against its own tree, and the tree simply provides its sap. This is what spiritual traditions tell us. This is what the tradition and wisdom of Christ Jesus teach us. And it has nothing to do with having a set number of lives, nor with going back to the beginning if we do not make the most of them. No, I perceive that as it's a very egotistical view. Our personalities are not that important. What is truly important is the spirit, which is our true self, the divine essence. And that divine essence unfolds its evolutionary path. And there are no such back and forth movements. And if it does this, if not, then you have to start over. Because I think that is a perception of spirituality that is too anthropocentric, too tied to our personalities. Another person tells us, I have heard a very curious theory about bringing heaven to earth, which has to do with timelines. What do you think of this theory? It will be explained. Next, you will receive it in the text tomorrow. I am not going to read it because it is very, very extensive. And I would say that this theory, like others in some way, brings us closer to what Christ taught us and what spiritual traditions have taught us. But it's as if we get bored with what Christ has taught, what the great traditions have taught. And we need it to be explained in another way. In my humble opinion, let's not fall into that mistake. Everything is explained, and with the words that need to be used. And now we look for substitutes to ultimately say the same thing, but in a more novel way. Be careful, because this can mislead us. Instead of helping us, hey, if the same thing is said, but with more updated examples, we can say examples that are different. Maybe that's good. It's good, but be careful. It can mislead us a lot. I believe it makes much more sense to delve into the wisdom that we already have at our disposal. This is what we modestly try to do in these monthly meetings, and not get into a dynamic that can mislead us and eventually lead us to New Age spiritual supermarket, into a dynamic of entertainment, distraction, a kind of spirituality that gets devalued because we turn it into novels, etc., etc. So, in relation to this person's question, there is a substance in this theory that he or she shares with us. There's an underlying certainty or a shell of a container that I believe, rather than helping, can truly mislead us and lead us into that dynamic of the different and novel that is so appealing to the New Age and the spiritual supermarket. This in some way does not contribute to us delving deeper, to us having the will for genuine transformation, and we end up distracting ourselves with one theory and then another theory and then another theory, accumulating theories, so to speak, and never delving into any of them. Let's delve into the wisdom that we already have at our disposal, which is exquisite. And from there, that is what I can modestly advise. In line with the movie Interstellar, in its final scene, where Cooper, the astronaut protagonist, is in a multidimensional reality in space-time, created by a very advanced interdimensional civilization. He wants to contact his daughter, Murph, to send her a message. This person, this friend, is telling us the fundamental plot line, and in the final part of the movie Interstellar, which we referenced at the beginning of this session, and we paused on what was 2 weeks ago, the session of presenting the theme of this monthly meeting. And this friend continues telling us, and with Cooper, the astronaut, now does, there is a robotic machine called TARS that asks him, how are you going to find the correct space-time in a fifth dimensional, multi-dimensional space, and be able to communicate OT with your daughter? And to this, Cooper replies, TARS, love. And this friend even gives us the link to the video of the scene that you will have in the text you are going to receive. When this person continues telling us, my perception of us in being able to glimpse the depth of both the title and a bit of the understanding of material and spiritual time is the answer to Cooper's question, to TARS. From Cooper to TARS, love, what do you think about it? That I am totally and absolutely in agreement. And furthermore, I am enormously grateful for the scene, because in just a few minutes, it very well condenses what is the fundamental plot of the movie, the link with the scene that it refers us to, reminding us of this dialogue, right? This change of opinion between TARS and Cooper, and indeed love. This love, there is the great dynamic love, there is the great tool. God is love, and whoever does not know love does not know God. And speaking of this, I have taken the liberty to include in the text you will receive a quote from the Book of Life by Jiddu Krishnamurti, precisely about love. Krishnamurti says in his work, The Book of Life, what do you understand by love? Love is the unknown. It can only be realized when we have understood and transcended what we know. Only when the mind is free from the known, only then can there be love. Only love is capable of generating compassion and beauty, order and peace. Love with its compassion exists when the self ceases to exist. Love with its compassion exists when the self is what we cling to, this small, they say, physical, emotional, and mental self and the associated personality and ego, when we stop clinging to this small self. Love with its compassion exists when the self ceases to exist. That is, it also reminds us of this. In our lives, we often encounter situations that make us feel like victims, as if we are trapped in a cycle of fear and insecurity. However, it is crucial to understand that we have the power to change this narrative. We do not have to succumb to these feelings of helplessness and dread. Instead, we can choose to confront these challenges with courage and resilience. By doing so, we refuse to be paralyzed by the fear that seeks to control us. This fear is often perpetuated by those who wish to see us remain in a state of vulnerability and uncertainty. They thrive on our insecurities, hoping that we will be too afraid to take action or stand up for ourselves. But we must not give them that satisfaction. We have the ability to rise above these negative emotions and take control of our own destinies. It is important to remember that fear is a natural response, but it should not dictate our actions or define who we are. By acknowledging our fears and facing them head-on, we can break free from the chains of victimhood and live our lives with confidence and purpose. This is precisely what those who seek to manipulate us do not want. They fear our strength and determination, knowing that once we realize our potential, we become unstoppable. So let us embrace our power, reject the role of the victim, and live our lives with courage and conviction. No. We are aware that we are in evolution. We are aware that we are approaching the waterfall that will come when it is due. We are aware of what we truly are. We are aware of our divinity and the imperishable nature of our true self. And from there, we experience all of this not as an obstacle, but as a springboard. And we prepare to enjoy that elevator that will take us to a new human cycle. And this is summarized, therefore, in coexistence with the system. Yes, collusion. Under no circumstances. We are going to live differently by being our best version, being good people, as we have said so many times, in the true sense of the word. And it will be this way that we have the right vibration, and that they and those who follow them go about their own business, they to theirs, and we to ours, with much love and with much compassion, but being very clear about what our path is. The path that leads us to the kingdom of Christ, no more, no less. I wanted to thank you because at one point during the presentation, we are almost finished. You talked about we only have 3 questions left and an experience to share. I wanted to thank you because at one point during the presentation, you talked about the past. And although I had heard it from you before, it clicked for me. A click from belief to experience. That all the past is integrated into who I am now, and I feel at peace with everything that has happened. In relation to the unfolding of the present moment, future, can you talk to us about how wonderful life is, bringing us as a gift based on our state of consciousness and the decisions we make in free will at each present moment, the experiences and people we need for our advancement in consciousness? If you have summarized it, my friend, well, you have summarized it wonderfully, Konadeti. It cannot be expressed better. Indeed, in life, everything is part of it. What we are, we owe to everything we have lived. We have to live everything we have lived. Whether our mind paints it white, whether our mind paints it black, whether our mind likes it, whether our mind dislikes it, etc., etc., we have to live everything with gratitude. Everything has had its meaning. Deep, everything has had its reason and its purpose. And what we are today, we owe to everything, to everything. If we erased experiences from the past because we don't like them, because they displease us, because we regret them, because they caused us pain, if we erase them, we wouldn't be who we are. Today, we are who we are. Today, we are here, sharing this wonderful moment of consciousness and of sharing among like-minded souls. We are doing it because of everything we have experienced in this life and in previous ones, by the way. But anyway, let's focus on where we are, on everything we have lived in this life. Let's see. Everything we've lived, let's look at it with gratitude. Let's dress it in love. And in that way, we are going to extract its essence in terms of consciousness. And we are going to raise its vibrational frequency, no matter what that experience was like. Gratitude and being aware that everything has its reason and its purpose. We embrace it with love, yeah? And that love is transformative, that love is alchemical and gives it a high vibration to everything we've experienced beyond what the mind may say or not say. And I share this precisely in line with the next question, because there is a person here who tells us, I am a 65-year-old woman. Before I turned 3, I repeatedly experienced the same traumatic situation. The one who was supposed to protect me abused me, and it happened in a noisy environment. Trauma associated with noise. In the present time, I have an extremely high sensitivity to noise. I am an adult person on the path of consciousness, but when noise appears, I transform into the girl from under 3 years old, and I relive the sensations and emotions I experienced. It's called cellular memory. It's as if no time has passed. What happens for an event from the past to be relived with such intensity? How could I manage to release this memory? Well, why can a past event be relived with such intensity? Because it has marked us deeply. It has left a mark on our mind, and not just on our visible mind, but on our unconscious and even on our subconscious. We shared this in the monthly meeting last December. Well, how can we manage to release that memory? In the way we have shared in response to the previous question. Accept it, embrace it with love. Embrace those experiences with love. Embrace those life experiences with love. Understand that they have made you who you are today. They have helped shape who you are today. Let your soul be in the state of oil, in the state of consciousness in which it finds itself, and embrace with love, and embrace with compassion, and with gratitude for everything you've experienced. This is precisely the way to release this memory. By the way, it is true that beyond this, which is the spiritual background, this society is increasingly noisy. It is also true that there is more and more noise, and certainly cities are becoming noisier, and there is what we often call music. It has simply turned into a box of noises, etc., etc. And that is an experience that surely also has a deep meaning in the current moment. And we end with question 42, because 43 is a sharing of an experience. Question 42, which tells us the faith that we are gradually having in God. Does it relate to the evolution of our consciousness and the time we are living in at the moment, present? Well, indeed, of course it does. They absolutely go hand in hand. And don't forget, friends, that the term faith, when we go to the original texts that are written in classical Greek, as we shared in a monthly meeting last fall, is related to the Greek word pistis. Pistis as a verb, pisteo as a noun. And pisteo means three things in one: trust in life, commitment to your true self, to yourself, but not to your small self, rather with your true self so that it becomes present, and perseverance in trusting life because everything has its profound meaning. Perseverance in that trust in life because life always embraces us. Perseverance in that trust in life because life always puts before us what we need for our spiritual and conscious evolution. Trust in life, well, perseverance in it, and perseverance in that commitment to what we truly are, to make it present, as we said before, being our best version and being good people in the true sense of the word. So thank you very much also to this friend for the question they have raised, which allows us to return. It's never too much to talk again about that pistis, that pisteo, what we currently call faith. And finally, in shared experiences, there is an experience, a sharing from a friend who reminds us of the ancient origin and symbolic nature of the game of the goose. Indeed, as this friend tells us, the game of the goose has a great symbolic meaning. No, I don't know who created it. He tells us that its origin is very ancient and widespread. I have no doubt about that. But there are many studies, even deep inquiry studies about the game of the goose, highlighting the great symbolic keys and the great wisdoms and teachings in a seemingly very simple game, because it is simple when it comes to playing it. But there is great depth, there is great underlying wisdom. So thank you very much to this friend for reminding us of the profound meaning of the game of the goose. And with that said, friends, we have concluded. We have reached the end of this monthly meeting and its Q&A session for questions with the Amadina Porpor. And I remind you that the next monthly meeting will be in May, and we will hold it not on the first Thursday of the month, but on the second and third Thursday of the month. Why? Because the first Thursday of the month, the first Thursday of May this year, coincides with the day 1, and the first is a holiday in many countries of people who usually participate in these monthly meetings. And that holiday might make it difficult for them to participate live. So we preferred to move it by a week. And we will hold the presentation on Thursday, May 8th. The response to your questions, as we did today, will be on Thursday, May 15th. And the theme we will carry out is no more and no less in relation to the Holy Week. We are immersed in the profound esoteric significance of the Passion, Resurrection, and Ascension of Christ Jesus. Its repercussions on each of us and in the current moment of humanity. So we will see each other in that monthly meeting in May with such an exciting theme. And thank you very much for your presence. Thank you very much for your participation. And to you, Kiko, many thanks for being there, managing the gears so that everything works wonderfully in these meetings. No? Thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you, Emilio, and to all the participants. Until May 5th, until May 8th.